Well, friends, we've been in this series, this small group series today, they're called Come and See. It's where we've been kind of in a place of being hungry, really hungry to see God. Sometimes we kind of come into church, we come into a place where we grew up, right? We grew up maybe the Veggie Tales, or we grew up kind of all these Sunday school lessons. And so we have this familiarity of who God is. And so we maybe even think of ourselves as people who've always believed. But sometimes it's our familiarity with God that leads us to a place where we're actually quite distant. And sometimes it's what we think we know about God that actually, frankly, keeps us at a distance. And so we've been in this season of just wanting to see him up and close. And you see, what's so fascinating, we've been reading through the entire book of John together. And let me just picture this with me for a moment. Imagine you and three friends were at an intersection, and it was a busy intersection, right? There's all these different traffic and lanes that are happening, the lights, and imagine you and the other friends are with you are on each different corners of this intersection, and then imagine if a car crash were to happen, and you'd see the debris, you'd hear the noise, you'd see all this stuff happen. Well, afterwards, imagine you and your three friends are kind of sharing with the police kind of the scene that unfolded in front of you. And as you share your story, all of your stories align, but you also each include unique perspectives. Because when a car comes one way, maybe it was closer to one person than the other, or if it hits and spins, one person saw the beginning, but one person saw the end. And so there's all this commotion and things happening. And so while the four of you share the same story, you each very much bring to the table a unique perception of what unfolded in front of you. And you see, that's the beauty of the Gospels in the New Testament. Because we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These people who all were a part of the same thing. But all getting to, at some point in their life, record their time with Christ. And you see, what's fascinating is that Matthew, Mark, and Luke really lean into the events that unfold. They lean into some of the teachings of Jesus, but more or less really the kind of the bang and the scratch and the tires screeching across the pavement. They lean into a lot, especially Mark, lean into a lot of just what Jesus does in the world. But you see, John is a little bit different. And it's frankly the reason why we've been doing this group series through his gospel. Is because while the others see what happens with the cars, John sees the people who are behind the wheel. He saw their faces. And you see, what's unique about John is that what we've been discovering in our groups, because we've been reading through the entire book, we're about halfway now, and our group series, we just finished up week number 3, so we've read, all of you have read chapters 1 through 9, which is amazing. Can we just give ourselves a little round of applause, right? Woo! Way to go. Sometimes the Bible can be a little intimidating, but how amazing is we can just sit together with new friends and just open it up and read and talk about it, right? No pressure, nothing crazy. We don't have to try to show off or show that we know something. We just get to ask questions, and we feel like, hey, I have a dumb question, but no, we get to ask questions, and it's a wonderful time. Aaron will tell you it's my favorite thing of the year that we get to do is together as a church. And you see, what's special is you've been seeing already, especially lately, that there's a lot of conversation that takes place. While John and his gospel capture a lot of moments of the clinging and clashing, he very much taps into the heart and mind of people while they are seeing Jesus do these very things. And you see, there's a tremendous significance behind it because John writes this at a time in the world much, much later when actually, frankly, he's the only one left. You see, John is one of the original 12 disciples with Jesus. When we read through his gospel, he refers to himself as the beloved, right? This kind of like fancy way of trying to describe myself. Well, no, he doesn't do it with an arrogant, prideful heart. But John is one of the original 12 with Jesus. And you see, by the time he writes, he is well in age, in his 70s and 80s. And you see, but all of the others that he started with, they're all gone. You see, Peter Peter was significant in the book of Acts in starting and establishing the early church in Jerusalem and Judea. And Peter was significant in kind of the spreading of the church and was even at Ephesus for a time, and all these things happened. But eventually what happens to Peter is he gets captured and arrested because they don't like that they're talking about Jesus, and they arrest Peter and they bring him to Rome where they execute him. Later on, Andrew, Peter's brother, Andrew, this one, again, a significant person we see in the Gospels, he too is a part of the start of the church in the early book of Acts. But later on, Andrew actually brings the news of Jesus to Russia. He brings it to modern day Russia, and he starts churches and shares about Jesus. And later on, he is martyred for his faith. Thomas, one of my favorite people. Thomas, who we'll even talk about him a little bit today. Thomas is sharing all these doubts and questions with Jesus, and he's known as such a thing. But later on, he is just this man who's on fire, and he actually brings the gospel of Jesus to India. And he, again, starts all these churches and is later martyred for his faith. Philip, the same. He brings it to Western and Northern Africa. And Matthew, similar, brings it to Eastern Africa. And others like Bartholomew, James, and Simon the Zealot, and Matthias, all these other people, again, establishing the church in the Middle East and all these regions and parts of Africa. And all of them, one after another, are martyred for their faith. Even Paul, who was not one of the original 12 disciples, but is a big leader in the start of the church, brings the news of Jesus to Europe, and he too is martyred for his faith. So John is the last one. He gets in trouble, and he gets arrested. But instead of being executed, he is brought onto an island where he's given a pickaxe to mine until he dies. And that's what he does. And it's there that he hears the news as other Christians come behind him. He hears these stories of all of his friends who've gone now. Now he's the last one. He hears the stories of how the church is spreading. And I can't imagine the joy of he's swinging along as he has a new person that gets dropped off on the island, and he hears, "Oh, you're a believer too." "Yeah, I know." And then just hearing, "Wow, the church went there. Oh my goodness, that's amazing." But you see, when John comes to a place where God leads him to write the gospel in the book of Revelation and 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, parts of the New Testament, it's at a place in his life where he begins to very much sense that the church is in new hands of people because all the ones that he was with have all been killed. And so he is the last one. And so when he writes John, and he writes 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John and Revelation, he writes this with a grandfather kind of heart to encourage and especially show people who Jesus really is. And you see, that is why when he writes 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, he writes like a dad. He's writing to his kids, his grandkids. He has that kind of heart when you read those letters. They're amazing. I encourage you to read them. They're some of the shortest books of the Bible, so it's pretty easy for those of us who aren't all that into reading. But what's amazing is that in the Gospel of John, he spends a significant amount of his time showing people that there is this great chasm in the heart of people that are wrestling with doubt and belief and anger and confusion, that even within the heart of those who are following Jesus as he writes the Gospels, that there is such great divide and tension even in their own soul as they're wrestling with the things that they're seeing and the things that they're hearing Jesus talk about. And Paul and John, when he writes his gospel, he talks about all these things. And you see what happens is that for 5 chapters straight, there's all this dialogue between Jesus and people, and all these things are happening. It's not so much miracles and healings, it's Jesus talking and people asking questions and him answering, and there's all this back and forth. But you see, all of it leads right up to the moment where now he's about to be arrested. He's about to be falsely accused, arrested, and then hung on the cross. You see, just before that happens in John 18, all these things begin to kind of point to a very specific moment where John is trying to help the church in their wrestling. And he shares a story that isn't in the other Gospels. The person whose this story is about is in the other Gospels. But John takes the time to talk all about who this man is and what Christ did in his life. Because in it lies one of the most powerful message of what Jesus is trying to speak to the mind of those who are torn. You see, what happens in John chapter 11, as Jesus and his disciples had been going around this whole region, and they have made their way kind of south of their region, south the sides of other side of the Jordan River, and far south of their whole people group. They get to a place where they hear this news that one of Jesus' great friends named Lazarus is sick. And they come and ask him to come and take care of him. But you see, what's fascinating is that Jesus does something a little bit different. John 11:4 says this. It says, "But when Jesus heard about it, he said, 'Lazarus' sickness will not end in death.'" Understand, this is what he's saying as a response to the messenger and to his disciples and whoever else is there with him. He's making it clear that Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this. And so although Jesus loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. Finally, he said to his disciples, "Let's go back to Judea." But his disciples objected. "Rabbi," they said, "only a few days ago the people in Judea were trying to stone you. Are you going there again?" They're like, "Jesus, what are you thinking? Those people hate you. They hate us. What are you talking about?" And then Jesus replied, "There are 12 hours of daylight every day. During the day, people can walk safely. They can see because they have the light of this world. But at night, there is danger of stumbling because they have no light." And then he said, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but now I will go and wake him up." The disciples said, "Lord, if he's sleeping, he'll soon get better." Like, what are you talking about? They thought Jesus meant Lazarus was simply sleeping, but Jesus meant Lazarus had died. So he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead." And listen to this. "And for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there. For now you will really believe." Come on, let's go. This is such a bizarre moment because we've seen, especially in the other Gospels, even in a few examples in John, there have been plenty of times where people have come wishing for the healing of, saying, "Jesus, please," they've come bringing faith, saying, "Lord, please heal my daughter, please heal my employee," all this stuff. And Jesus heals them without even going to visit the person. He heals them. And what is so bizarre in this moment is that we'll read here in a few more verses, is that at this point, Lazarus had already died. And he'd actually been dead for quite some time, about 4 or 5 days. And you see, it is finally now, at this point, where to most people the door had closed. There's no way. I mean, Jesus had an opening early on when he was sick, when he was, ill. And then finally, Jesus could have rushed that way. Or when he had the messenger come, he could have healed them then. But he chose not to. But now, in this moment when the door has slammed shut, and not an hour or 2 later, but days later, Jesus decides, now we're going to go. And he says, "For your sake, I am so glad I wasn't there. Because finally, now you'll believe. Finally, now you'll get it." And they don't. I love what Thomas says next, man. I love Thomas. He says this in verse 16. Thomas, nicknamed the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Well, let's go too, and we'll die with Jesus." I mean, because they're thinking, oh, all these people are angry. They're going to stone us. Sure enough, we're going to cross back over to that area. As soon as they see us cross the horizon, we're dead meat. They are missing it. But what's happening in this moment is that these are people who believe, understand that. These are people who have seen Jesus walk on water. They've seen him provide and feed thousands of people from just a few breadcrumbs and some fish. I mean, they've seen him do immense, incredible miracles. They've seen him do things. These are people who believe, but even in this moment, they doubt. They think the door has slammed shut. There's no way. Yeah, sure, we'll go back. But there ain't nothing Jesus can do. Instead, we're actually going to die. They already predict failure of the moment. And they're believers. And I tell you this right now. There are so many of us and so many people who are clinging to God. But there is immense doubt in our soul. As we go through life and we go through scenarios, we think, man, the Lord, he could do this. He could kind of take care of it this way. He could kind of do it this way. But when the door has slammed shut, we think, man, now it's too far gone. Man, there's no way that God could step in and do something. I've been sick for too long and have prayed for God to heal me for too long. There's no way. I've been trying over and over again to get this thing right, ask for God to help me, but I keep messing up and I can't move forward. There's no way that God can do anything now. We come to this place even as people who believe, and yet our belief is riddled with doubt. There's all these holes in the boat, and so we make it our journey of faith. We believe in God, and we try to be good, but the whole time we're there with our bucket as the water's coming in, and we just, shh, shh. That's why we get so afraid when things happen in our life. When we lose that job, or we get that diagnosis from the doctor, or we're told by that person we love that they're leaving and they're never coming back. We just think, it's just how it is. And we know that God is good. Yeah, we know that we love him. But there's nothing he can do now. And we do this for years. And that's all we know. And we think this is normal. That's all we know. There's no way that God could change that person. There's no way that he could change this situation. There's no way. And so we continue to believe, but we also continue to doubt. And we don't say it out loud. We will never say it out loud. But it's in there, isn't it? You see, this is an incredible moment where now finally, even those who believe will see that Jesus can do anything. Because what happens now is that after Thomas makes this comment out the side of his mouth, and man, I tell you what, sometimes we let our mouth slip, and it's there for every human person to read from this. I mean, it's been 2,000 years, and everybody has read this, right? You see what happens next is that Jesus goes back, and he meets with Martha. It says this in verse 17, when Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been dead in his grave for 4 days. Wow. Bethany was only a few miles down the road from Jerusalem, and many of the people who had come to console Martha and Mary in their loss. Many people were there. Understand, this is not a private event. All these folks are here. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you only had been here, my brother would not have died. And how much of the time, even as people of faith, we We sometimes don't mean anything bad by it either. But Jesus, if you had only done this, then this would not happen. God, if you would have just heard my prayer over here and you would have just known what I wanted, then things would have been okay. This would not have happened the way that it did. If only. You see, but what is wonderful is that she does not stop there. Because Martha continues to talk. And she says what is one of the greatest words in Scripture. But if you had only been here, my brother would not have died. But, verse 22, but even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. This is a beautiful moment, church, and I hope you're seeing it. This is a beautiful moment where the door has slammed shut. They have no idea. In some way, they think that God can never redeem or recover this moment. But she says, but I know that God, who is our Father in heaven, will give God, who is the Son, whatever he asks for, whatever you say, I know will happen. And she has no idea what is about to happen. There's this beautiful moment where she begins, Jesus talks to her about how there's this, Jesus, how Lazarus would come back to life, and she's thinking, oh yeah, in the last days, when the day of judgment comes, all believers will rise up, and so she does the good believer thing, and she kind of, references to what she knows, but it's wonderful what Jesus says to her, because he's making it crystal clear. I'm the way, and that I'm the hope. And you see, what is so profound in this moment is that Martha begins to kind of establish this new sense of what it means to believe, that now, even when she is doubting, now she is choosing something even higher. She's choosing to depend on Jesus, even though she thought that he could have done these things over here, and even though doubt is raising its voice up, she says, but I depend on you to take care of this situation. And you see, what is so vital for us to understand, what is so important for us to see, is that the best doubt filler is a relentless attitude of depending on God. Understand, when we're in that boat and we're cruising through life and we're trying to get the water out, understand that the greatest plugs that we have for this doubt, that if God would have done this, only this would have happened. If this would have happened differently, or I wish I would have been the one in charge and had it my way. And we have all this doubt, the best doubt filler in our journey of faith is to depend. To depend on him. To depend on him. And it's this relentless attitude that even though I don't see a way through, I know, God, that in some way that you will make a way through this. I don't know how. I don't know where to begin. I don't even know what to pray for. I am so lost. But Lord, I know that you know. And so, Lord, instead of being consumed with anxiousness, I will instead fall on my knees and depend on you in prayer and say, Lord, please take care of this. I don't know how to fix this thing with my child. I don't know what to do with my job. I don't know what's happening in my marriage. But Lord, I depend on you. I depend on you. Understand, we get this wrong in our journey of faith because we think that as children, we depend on our parents and we grow throughout life and we depend less and less on them. And then we get to a place of being independent and we carry that into our journey of faith. Understand, it works the opposite. I love what the great pastor and writer in South Africa, Andrew Murray, said this. I love this quote that he shares. He says, humility, the place of entire dependence on God, is the first duty and the highest virtue of the creature. He's talking about us. And the root of every virtue And so pride, or the loss of humility, is the root of every sin and evil. Understand that we naturally drift towards pride. We maybe want to see ourselves as arrogant people. But let me say it this way instead. We naturally drift towards being self-reliant. That I can read a book or listen to a podcast and figure this thing out. That I am tough and can, fight my way through things. So I'm going to pull myself up from my own bootstraps. I got this. Understand, it is frankly, the stubbornness, it is the self-reliance that is raging havoc within our soul and within our heart that makes us not depend on God. And it brings us to a place where, frankly, we think we don't really need him all that much. And we would never say that out loud as believers. But we say it with our actions. When we say that we believe, but when things are really hard at work and we've had a terrible week, we think, man, I don't really need to go to church, or I don't need to be with my Bible study. Or man, we are with a friend and they're struggling with something, and man, it really brings back nostalgia. We struggle with something too. Maybe they're talking about their marriage, or they're talking about something happening in life. And you see, what happens is we don't actually bring up God. We instead say things like, oh, it's going to be okay. Or we instead kind of inject this self-help idea of, oh, believe in yourself. It'll be all right. You're strong. You're courageous. But we leave out this idea of depending on God. And so we make ourselves the hero. And frankly, we naturally drift this way. Understand that about yourself. And we need to, if we are going to be people who welcome in the great power of our amazing King, and we allow his presence and his peace and his purpose saturate every moment of our life, and every desire of our life, and every aspect of our life, then we need to learn how to hush the voice of self-reliance that is very loud in our soul and say, no, I need God in this moment. I may have prayed 1,000,000 times, but I will not stop. I am depending on God. It is this relentless attitude of dependence. It is this journey of saying, I will become less and he will become more. It's this path of saying, Lord, I need you. More than yesterday, I need you today. And I'll need you even more tomorrow than I do today. Oh, I need you. Even for those of us, we've been familiar with God. We spend time in his word. We come to church. It is so easy for us to drift to a place where we think we don't need him. But understand. That is when we start to boot him out of his home in our soul. And that's when we start to witness again that bucket and water kind of lifestyle of always be consumed with the moment and always be consumed with the circumstances we find ourselves, and not knowing what contentment is like and not knowing what peace is like, because this is the rhythm that we just know. And we sometimes even think, I'm a good servant of a God, and so I don't mind doing this. I don't mind doing this. And so we think of ourselves as strong, and we think of ourselves as one who prevails, but we forget that a heart that is humble, a heart that is willing to fall before the Lord and say, God, I need you now, is one that keeps us in a place of him still moving. Because I love what happens next. Because as this dialogue exchanges between Martha and Jesus, Jesus says to her in verse 25, it says, I'm the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this, Martha? She says, yes, Lord. I have always believed you are the Messiah, so the Son of God, the Son of God, the one who has come into the world of God, from God. This is a powerful moment where we're very much in front of her. Martha is making it clear that she is depending on who Jesus is. And understand in this journey of depending on God, it matters that we begin very much in a place of always being fixated on who God is. That God, you are the creator of all of this, Lord. You are way above us, Lord. That you are holy. You are holy. You are perfect, and I am not. None of this is perfect, Lord. That God, you are the one who is outside of all this, so you see past, present, and future. You know the best way through all this, Lord. Understand that if we're going to be people who depend heavily on God, it begins very much when deep in our soul we fixate on who He is, because He never changes. That God, you are the King of all of this. You are the Savior of the world. You are my rescuer and redeemer. God, this is who you are. This is why it's so important for us to read Scripture and we see who God is and who He tells us that He is. It is so important for us to understand that we must fixate and say, Lord, even though I want to be consumed in this, consumed in my worry, consumed in my fear, Lord, I will fix my eyes on you and who you are, that you are perfect and that you are good. That is who you are. And I love what continues to happen because Jesus then kind of meets with Mary, and there's more things that take place. What's beautiful is that now Mary comes out of the house, and Jesus and Mary begin to talk. And it says in verse 33, it says, when Jesus saw her weeping, he's talking about Mary. When Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing, listen to this, with her, a deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. Where have you put him? Jesus asked. They told him, Lord, come and see. And then Jesus wept. And the people who were standing nearby said, wow, he loved him. The one who could have prevented it in the first place has this intentional moment of showing people that he feels the weight of the world that they feel. And he's making it so crystal clear that not just see who I am, but how I am the world. This journey of depending on God continues when we fixate on how God is, on how He is loving, and how frankly He gets angry in this moment, not at Mary, not at the people who are grieving, but He gets angry because humanity welcomed in disease, which led His friend to death. And He's angry at just the situation itself. And then He gets frustrated, He gets irritated, and then he weeps. He shows that this is how He is. This is how He is with people who love Him. He loves them. He loves them. This is how He is with us in the world. I love, we'll be sitting at home, and my wife and I could be in the kitchen or in our room or somewhere else, and Mason or could be watching a movie, and lately they've been really fascinated with the kind of the old school Little Mermaid movie, right? Not the new one, but the old school one. And Nora will run in the moment of the movie where Ursula gets all like into this giant monster, the sea monster comes out of the water. Nora will run into the room and say, Dad, it's the scary part, it's the scary part. Come cover my eyes, quick, come cover my eyes. And a part of me is like, just stay in here, right? We don't have to go back, and I don't have to go back and cover your eyes, but I do. Go in, and even by the time we get back into the living room, the moment the scene is over, I'll go back in, cover her eyes, and oh, it's done, okay. She knows that her dad doesn't mind being interrupted for her. That her daddy is always willing to set aside what he's focused on. And even to go do something so silly as to cover her eyes. This is how our God is. He is not inconvenienced. Oh my word, He loves. He loves when you bring things to Him. Even if you feel like you've been flooding His email box with all this stuff. He loves when his children come and tug on his pant leg and say, even what we think is the silliest of things, say, would you please help with this? He loves it when we depend on him because it's how we are. It's how we are. It's this heartache inside of us when we depend on him. He loves to show us how he is with us. And so I encourage you, fixate on how he loves to interact with you. He loves to be with people. We learn this when we spend time with other believers of the faith. We learn this when we spend time in the world, in the Word. We see the very heart of God, and he doesn't hide it. He loves to show it. So perhaps maybe there's a callous on you. Frankly, maybe even a stubbornness that says, I got this and I'll be okay. It is robbing you and sabotaging your journey of faith, of really seeing who God is and allowing the situation to be handed over to him and handled in a way that is so good and redeeming. I encourage you, fixate on how he is in the world. And what's so special, I love this moment. I love how the moment ends because as Jesus kind of has this moment of again, he's weeping, he's crying, he's getting angry. There's all these things that are happening. Some even people chime in. They speak out of the side of their mouth. They say some kind of dumb stuff, Jesus gets frustrated at them. And then in verse 39, it says that Jesus said this. He says, roll the stone aside, Jesus told them. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, but Lord, he has been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible. In verse 40, Jesus responded, didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe? So they rolled the stone aside. Then Jesus looked up to heaven and said, Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me, but I said it out loud for the sake of all these people standing here, so they will believe you sent me. And then Jesus shouted, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came walking out, and his hands and feet bound in grave cloths, and his face wrapped in headcloth. And Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. And I love this moment because, frankly, it shows that in our journey of depending on God, it requires us to trust him. It requires us to trust him. Understand that depending on God is you looking to God, but then trusting in God is when he looks at you and looking to see if you'll listen, looking to see if you'll be obedient, looking to see if you're willing to be patient, if you're willing to be steadfast, if you're willing to continue to humble and lower yourself, to continue to even depend on him more and more and more. Saying if you're willing, say, Lord, I depend on you and I trust. And Lord, if you speak and you tell me to do something, I will listen, even if it does not make sense to me. That, Lord, I've been lifting to you this prayer of reconciliation for a relationship. And when you tell me to go do something, I may think it's bizarre, but I trust that you know what you're doing. And so I'm going to do it. Understand that this relationship with God, this whole thing of following Jesus, it is us lowering ourselves and saying, Lord, I need you. And no matter what, God, no matter what, I will always depend and I will always trust in you. And where you lead me, I will follow. I love what C.S. Lewis says. He says this amazing quote. Put it on the screen for me. He says, the thing is to rely on God. The time will come when you will regard all this misery as a small price to pay for having been brought to that dependence. Meanwhile, the trouble is that relying on God has to begin all over again every day, as if nothing yet has been done. This journey of dependence, this journey of trusting, isn't just us sitting here saying, God, show me that you're good enough to be trusted. It's one mixed with, Lord, I should trust you because who you are. I can depend on you because of how you are. But regardless of what happens around me, I will always need you more and more every day. Regardless of whether my prayers were answered yesterday or even in the last 10, 20 years, Lord, I will continue more and more to need you and want you because you are good. And even when the door has been closed in a situation, even though we think that nothing can happen now, Lord, I depend on you. Because even though there's doubt, I'll have that attitude of Martha that says, but. Even though the situation's gone and nothing seems to be rebuildable, but I know that you can do anything. I know that you can still work. And I know that you're not done. Would you stand with me and let's pray together?